Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show, Wednesday edition. My name is Leon Jones. Thought I would come in, drop a live stream in today. Didn't get a chance to do one last week. And when I do not do a live stream, I will let you all know 3 hours ahead of time, 4 hours ahead of time in my community section. Just get there, and just in case I don't do it live, I will do pre recorded content, and the pre recorded content will be just as long as my live streams. Now, what I'm going to do with this live stream, I'm not going to talk about what everybody else is talking about. Everybody's talking about um, just pearly things and the rapper that got shot. That's not going to be my angle today. I'm going to talk about community, ideologies, and of course, politics. But the politics that I'm going to talk about is local politics because next week is election day, 1 week from yesterday, or 6 days from the day. And then I'll have an open panel. Now, I've already dropped the link for those who are interested in coming up on a panel. Now, the rules of the panel, I want 4 to 6 people at one time because it's easier for me to control. Even if I had the version where I could put 10 people on the panel, no, I don't want 10 people on the panel. 4 to 6 is fine with me. Now, we're going to get into this first part of this live about community. Because in the black sector YouTube, I hear community all the time. Well, I want to help the community. It's about the community. Well, it sounds nice, but does anybody really know what the definition of community is? Does anybody really know what community signifies? Does anybody have any idea? And I guarantee you, most of us don't. See what happens. Too many of us people, we tend to be sheep. We hear certain talking points, certain code words, and we repeat them, even if we don't have any idea of what's meant by those code words. Now, what I'm going to do is not follow suit. I'm going to give you the definition of community, and then I'm going to talk about it because this community, I keep hearing that. On all the live streams, particularly in Black YouTube. Now, first of all, if you're going to have a community, you have to have people there in that community. You have to have like minds in that community. A community has to be functioning. Now, in the black community or with black people, we generally talk about community. Let's just be honest. It's the hood because many black people who have a lot of money don't live in the hood. Why? Because if you live in a hood, chances are you may be carjacked. Not saying that won't happen in a nice community, but it's more likely to happen in a hood. Why? Because a number of people who live in a hood are oppressed economically. They're deprived of a lot of benefits, such as a good job. Now, when I say hood, everybody in the hood is not bad. There are some people who are living in the hood that are progressing. They just don't want to leave the hood. So what I'm doing is basically coming from a general aspect. Please, the exception is not the rule. I'm going by the rule. Now, talking about community, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to give you a definition of what community is. Now, it's not the community. I know Brother Obsidian, he started out with using the word community. Nah, I'm not going to use the word community or anything like that. I'm going to use the word community. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Again, when it comes to community, how do we actually define community? Well, again, just close your eyes and imagine your organization's community. Well, it is a mist of good feeling, a fellowship of uncertainty. Now, does it have a human face? Remember something about communities. Communities are people. They are not abstractions. They are not rhetoric. They are human beings. You can talk you can't talk personality with each of the people in your community of interest to understand their individual wants and needs. However, you may have hundreds, thousands, millions of bodies and dreams and desires walking through your doors. So you may have to think about people in clusters. So when it comes to community, you have to think of people in clusters. See, a community is a group of people who share something in common. So you can define a community by the shared attributes of the people in it and or by the strength of the connections among them. So basically you have a bunch of people who are alike in some way, who feel some sense of belonging or interpersonal connection. Now, if you want to be able to generalize about individuals within a group, their shared attributes are most important to understand. So basically, what I'm saying, to involve and mobilize individuals within the group, the strength of their connections is most important. Understand this: communities may be huge and diffuse or niche and tightly connected. This is the key to be specific about whom you seek. So, how do you get to a tighter definition of community? One easy piece is to start to make a list of the people to whom you are already relevant, ones who love you, who's connected to you, who are your existing insiders, retired blue collar men who love to tinker with cars, skateboarding teenagers, using your plaza as a park, moms with toddlers from the housing complex across the street, artsy college students with weird haircuts, Cleopatra, or yeah, I'll just say Cleopatra dancers with their drums. Now, do I call that community? Now, it seems to me it's more. Good evening, Jenny V. Welcome to my stream. Now, when it comes to community, okay, that could be one way you could define a community. Now, when you say moms with toddlers from a housing complex, now we're getting into something a little different. Yes, that's a community, but that's a community that's going to be filled with welfare, the welfare state, poverty. And within that type of community, you have high crime. Now, when we start mentioning public housing, we start mentioning no fathers. It could be gang infested, no economy. Now, there are a bunch of churches, but it's nothing to write home about. Now, again, I'm not saying that everybody from the hood is bad, but when you mention housing complex, like Northeast Gardens or something like that, then we are talking about what most of us talk about here in the section of Black YouTube. We're talking about the hood. But now communities come in all different flavors. There are good communities. There are bad communities. Now, if you're really going to deal with a community, I believe a community is something that you honestly take pride in. It's a place where you live. It's a place where you could work. It's a place where you could fellowship, go to school. And if you have a decent community, it's a place that is safe. Now, again, I'm giving you the generality, not the exception. Now, let's move on when we talk about community. Just bear with me. And as soon as Brother Nate, shout out to him, he finishes with his stream, some of the audience will probably be over here. But in the meantime, stick with me on this one. So, as I go on about community, when we deal with community, we can start listing relevant communities, and you'll notice that the shared attributes that bind them are varied. Sometimes a community is defined by a place where people live, work, or play. Sometimes a community is defined by identity, which may be externally assigned, like race, or internally defined, like religion, sometimes by affinity, something people like to do and do together, sometimes by affiliation, people you know, experiences you've shared, values you hold in common. Now, these shared attributes are not distinct. A community of people who go to trivia night at a neighborhood bar could basically identify by place, the bar, identity, nerds, affinity, trivia, or affiliation, old friends. Now, how much does the strength of connections amongst members matter to the definition of community? Well, a strong community engenders fellowship amongst members, advances specific social norms, and has identifiable leaders. Weak communities are more diffuse with members who may not even be aware of each other. So these differences are useful when considering how and who to teach or who to reach out. It's again, the differences are useful when considering how and who to reach out to when trying to get involved with a new community. So basically, you're more likely to find a transgender community if there is an organized meetup or support group or alphabet community center marketed in some visible way, likely coordinated by a leader or set of leaders by the community exists, whether it is strong or weak. So if you want to be more relevant to a community, you must already be engaged. And what I mean by that, you have to see what to do and you have to understand about the people. What do you know about the people? Do you know how connected people feel to each other? Are there identifiable leaders or representatives you can talk to about their shared issues, goals, and dreams? Starting with the people you already have a good gut check on the question of how well and clearly you can define a community. Your insiders are not monolithic. They probably can't be defined exclusively by broad demographic terms like Gen X. More likely, they are defined by ideas like adults who like to be creative with their children or adventurous, urban professionals seeking community in a fast paced world. So, communities outside your organization are generally complex. They're not all ones, twos, and threes. Again, community is very complex, as you see. But again, when it comes to community, you already have to be connected. Again, connected by what? Again, you got to have some connections. That's the thing. All right, bear with me. But dealing with community. Okay. Again, I already told you communities outside your organization are equally complex. They're not all ones, twos, and threes when we talk about outsiders. People we don't yet engage. There's a tendency to collapse down to the most simplistic shared attributes with little regard for the intricacies alongside them. So basically, we tend to jump immediately to demographics. We want to reach teens or young adults or the Asian American community. There are painfully broad descriptors. So, my question is, when it comes to young adults, do you want to reach young adults who are unemployed, frustrated, and struggling to get out of their parents' basements? The jet setters, building high powered global careers, the ones who are trying to balance love and life and art and work in a brand new city on their own. Just as you treat your insiders as complex people in overlapping communities, think of your outsiders the same way. So try to find outsiders and have some credible link to what you offer people who almost come as oppressed to those who will never come. Almost comes are inclined towards your content, but they can't see your door. They are foreign, but they share your values with your insiders. A passion for nature, a curiosity about history, a desire to belong. There are outsiders who can become insiders if you can build doors that speak with them. In other words, that passage, will you let them in? Now, again, those were variables of communities. Now, when we talk about a number of communities, let's be honest. We talk about communities based on demographics. An example, cities like Chicago. If you go into a community, there is Little China or Chinatown. That's a community. Then your west side and your south side of Chicago, that's mainly your black community. Then you have a Jewish part of Chicago, an Italian part. Most of these communities are segregated communities. Chicago is a segregated city. Baltimore is segregated as well. I know, being from Baltimore, the northwest part of Baltimore is, for the most part, it's black. Baltimore, 60% black. Baltimore, Detroit, even Gary, Indiana. I live here in Indiana now, about an hour and a half from Gary. Gary is mostly black. Now, when we really go in depth about a community and we talk about leadership, well, what type of leadership do you have in your community? See, and this is what ties into local politics as well. And one thing I hear a number of us blacks talk about here on YouTube is the community. I want to help the community. However, do you live in the community? And if you're talking about the community, what community are you talking about? See, if you live in Miami, are you talking about me coming down to Miami to live in that community with you? What does your community have to offer? See, in the black community, what happens is the individuals who come in for the economics are Koreans and individuals from the Mideast. Now, these are the individuals who set their businesses up in the hood and they make money off of their products. But what do they do with the money? The money goes from the hood to their community. And I guarantee you, when you get into a community outside the black community, now there are some decent black communities now, and ones that I can name for you are from Prince George's County, Maryland. You know, look at Upper Marlboro, look at Mitchellville, look at Largo and Kettering. Now, although those communities are thriving, blacks don't own businesses in those communities. Therefore, the money is not turning over in those businesses. That's a problem. You see, when you really talk about community, we can go back and talk about Black Wall Streets. Now, there was more than one Black Wall Street. There was Rosewood. Uh, it was Omaha, Nebraska. I believe Arizona. Uh, Wilmington, North Carolina. All kinds of black communities out there. But when you don't read, most of us, we only know about Tulsa. So there's a lot more out there. I believe Illinois has had a community. But a community is basically an area where like minded people live. Now, can a community be diverse? It could, but there could be some problems with a diverse community because of different cultures. And what you have to do in that community is, if you're going to have leadership, because you have to have somebody to represent you in that community on a local political level. Well, when we deal with real communities, we don't deal with communities based on diversity. It's not going to happen, Captain. We deal with communities again based on demographics. If you don't believe me, go to your urban and suburban areas. Now, if you go outside of the suburban area of Chicago, like Bolingbrook, those places, who lives there? It's most likely white folk who live there. Generally, those suburban communities, they tend to have higher rent. There's less crime. Now, I live here in Lafayette. Lafayette is a college town. So, is it community? There is a sense of community here. However, when it comes to being in this college town, a number of the students are very transient because this is a college town, just like State College, Pennsylvania. So, when we talk about saving the community, what are we saving? Because if you think about it, the urban areas are dysfunctional, just like the trailer park areas. Those are the areas that have the most oppression, poverty, lack of jobs. Now, why are there lack of jobs, particularly in a place like Gary, Indiana? Well, Gary, Indiana is crime ridden. So nobody wants to lose money by putting businesses up in Gary, Indiana. They don't want to do it. Or some parts of Michigan City, Indiana. What's good, Mel? Shout out to you, brother. But again, communities have a lot of good communities, have a lot of functioning families. The man is in the house. There are businesses there. Communities thrive. They're safe. Communities always have something, good communities. They always have something for kids to do, like their parks are better. Now, a community could also be just a cul-de-sac or small subdivision. Now, of course, the better your community is, you're going to have to get into the homeowners association if you are buying a house. Well, again, communities. Now, one area that blacks had and they still have is church. But here's the problem with the church. The church doesn't support men. Most of the women support the churches. And there's a reason why. Because the pastors, their ideology, it's not to market the men. Because the men aren't supporting the churches financially like the women are. And when it comes to different ideologies, particularly when it comes to blacks, in my humble opinion, which is for the most part, it's a fact, we're split as a race. And one thing that's really split black men and black women up is politics. Now, don't get me wrong, you're still going to have 80% of black men voting Democrat. They always do. Problem with a number of black men, they continue to follow black women. That's fine. However, when you are electing and you're dancing for the same party every election and nothing changes, you have to look at yourself. Are you in the right place? You see, when it comes to urban communities, why are they failing? They're failing because, number one, the leadership is bad. There are no families, the businesses. Even though some foreigners will come and put businesses in the African American communities, they're not growing. They're blighted. That's why if you drive down certain streets in some areas like East St. Louis or St. Louis, Missouri, Baltimore, Chicago, or Gary, Indiana, the buildings are blighted. Now, at one time, the city was good. When the jobs left, and I'm going to talk about Gary, when the jobs left, white folk, they took themselves from Gary into Maryville. Now, Maryville was a town created in 1971. There was no Maryville. Now, there's a place in Lake County called New Chicago, or not New Chicago, Lake Station. Well, what Lake Station did, they changed their name to Lake Station. It used to be called East Gary. They didn't want to have any affiliation with Gary. Why? Because Gary had been a tarnished city, poverty, a lot of crime. And one thing you have to do to keep a community functioning is have economics. This is what's not mentioned. How do you bring economics to places like Gary, Indiana? Well, what's going to happen and what could happen is gentrification. But then what do you do with the people who are already there? Well, when rents are so high, they're going to come out into places like mine, Lafayette. And what they're going to bring is that ghetto mindset. So where in a place I live in Lafayette, Indiana, that didn't have that much crime, and bringing people from the urban areas that were displaced by gentrification into what was once a prosperous city, and it's going to be run down in the next 10 to 20 years, especially if you build more government housing. Now, I know with black people, yes, they went through redlining. A lot of things happened to black people. Black people were prosperous, but also you had immigrants who were prosperous too. This country is made up of immigrants. However, there's still some of us who they're complacent. Now, do some individuals want to be poor? I don't believe anybody wants to be poor. But when we have a community, communities are built. They're not something you constantly talk about. Want to help the community. Well, if you're pro-community, what you have to do is start small. In fact, real communities need banks. Now, again, I have dropped the link if anybody wants to come up. And let me go to my poll question here. I got 7 votes so far. Should we look at politics on a local level? 71% say yes, 29% say no. Now, if you think about it, ideologies have effects on communities. And when you have a group of people who believe in a feminist ideology, they don't believe in families, that's going to downgrade your community. Why? Because what you're going to have a crime-ridden, you're going to have a welfare type of community. And with that welfare type of community, you're not going to take pride in it. It's going to be dirty. And nobody's going to come live there who has some type of money. Unless they buy every house on the block that's been blighted and they move you out. But I guarantee when the gentrification starts taking place and the streets are upgraded, the individuals who were there and they were impoverished, they're going to be kicked out. Why? because a good community has a higher property value. A bad community doesn't. That's why when you go to some of these blighted communities, you can buy a house for $1, but you're going to have to fix that house up. So that dollar, you're going to have to spend maybe $400,000 to have a nice house. But you can have a nice house in that community if you have the money to fix it up. But what do your streets look like? I mean, a person who's really community focused and they would talk about cleaning up the community, it's not just cleaning up the people's mindsets, it's cleaning up the trash in the communities. It's putting out some type of laws that, okay, everybody should have their grass cut. If you have dogs, and one of the things, and I love dogs, but I can't stand walking on poop when individuals don't clean up after their dogs. And this is what happens in some communities. I mean, I live out here and there are a lot of dogs out here. You see, let me tell you something. We talk about the hood, we talk about the suburban area. Basically, the hood is not the real problem. I might sound contradictory here, but it's the people. If you have an old car or even a new car, and over time you don't take care of it, it's not going to work for you. And this is what happened in some of the black areas. The older generation, which is the silent generation or the World War I generation, they left houses to their children. Now, what did the children do? They couldn't pay the taxes on the houses, so they let the houses go and they deteriorated. They became structurally inefficient, inhabitable, and they just stayed there. And over time, the structure started to rot. And when the structure rots, either the city is going to tear it down, and in some instances, if the house is definitely inhabitable, the city is going to come and board up the house. Now, who wants to see a city with a bunch of boarded up houses? I know Baltimore has nice row houses, and if you go into Baltimore, and I'm gonna put up some. Let me go in here one time and put up row houses, and these are nice row houses in Baltimore. I want to show you as I share my screen. And one thing that I love architecture. So I'm going to go ahead and present this to you, and I'm going to show you what some row houses look like. This is what they look like in Baltimore. These are row houses. This is what you see in Baltimore. This is what they look like. These are row houses. Now, there are a lot of these in Baltimore. Now, the row houses were put in Baltimore and in D.C. and Philadelphia and Boston and New York. These were put there because if you look at the East Coast, a lot of the cities are along I call it the I-95 corridor, but they were all built near water because the only way you could get in these cities is definitely by boat. And it was steamboats that actually became the mecca of transportation for goods before they even had a rail system. Now, I'm getting on some of my civil engineering stuff, but this is what row houses look like. Now, I've seen a number of these row houses. This is what some of them look like in Baltimore now. Now, I'm going to show you what they look like blighted, and just stick with me. You will understand what I'm talking about. Blighted neighborhoods. And when we deal with blighted neighborhoods, this is what I'm talking about. Community. This is what I'm talking about. Do you want to live in this kind of neighborhood? This is blighted. This is blighted right here. Look at urban blight. Abandoned. This is all in Detroit. All in Detroit. This is what you get when you live in the hood. This is supposed to be a community. These are abandoned houses in Detroit. This is what you get when you live in the hood. Would you all want to live in something like that? Absolutely not. This is what the hood looks like. Blighted. All blighted. Now, at one time, there were houses there that people lived in and they were good. What happened to them? Well, what happened to them? Nobody took care of them. And when it comes to Baltimore, blighted neighborhoods, and just bear with me. And I lived in Baltimore. Um, blighted row houses. Just bear with me. All right. Now, let me share my screen again. And I'm going to show you what it all looks like in Baltimore. Remember those row houses I just showed you? This is what it looks like in Baltimore. Do you want to live in a community like that? These are all abandoned row houses. And at one time, they were nice. But what happened? People didn't take care of them. But they call this community. Now, what does that community have to offer? That community is busted. It's deteriorated. And see, one thing I will tell you about a community, if you're really going to have a community, you have to take care of it. Most people don't take care of their communities. Another area that I need to show you. Let's show you some upstanding, some New Orleans hoods. New Orleans blighted homes. Let's show you. New Orleans is one of them. Rundown images of rundown properties in New Orleans. Now, right here, let me share my screen. This is what it looks like in New Orleans. These are rundown homes. Now, would you like to live in a community like that? Let me blow it up for you. I'm only using one screen here, so bear with me. These are all images of blighted homes in New Orleans. Would you want to live there? I wouldn't want to live there. Some of these homes are crack houses. Some of these homes, you've found dead bodies there from crimes, drugs. But you talk about community. Now, you still have some people who live in these communities. The problem is they didn't take pride in their communities. Now, some of them may not have had the money to fix up the communities, but this is what blacks talk about really when they talk about communities. They're talking about like this. They're not fixed up. And some people, they brag because they're from the hood. I'm not even going to call it the hood. They're from neighborhoods like this. And a number of them, they believe that they're tough because they grew up like this. Yes, you've had to do a lot of fighting in those neighborhoods. But could you get out of them? Some could and some couldn't. Now, again, what I'm just showing you is You saw bad communities. Now, I'm going to show you what good communities look like. Good community images. Just bear with me. Now, I'm going to just blow it up for you. Now, again, just because a community isn't the hood doesn't mean it's a perfect community. It just means that, and this is a pretty decent one. Bunch of houses. It, now behind here, it's a lot of farmland, but it's a pretty decent community. It looks safe. See, one thing you have to understand about a community is, do you feel comfortable living in a particular community? Do you want to be in a typical community? Do you feel comfortable? Again, anybody that wants to come up, I'm approaching an hour. Anybody that wants to come up, I just dropped the link. Let me go back to my poll again. I have 8 votes so far. Should we look at politics on the local level? 75% yes, 25% no. Let's get the likes up. And I thank everybody for watching right now. Brother Nate is streaming. That's why it's a little light here, but that's okay. Let me continue. Within the community, there are different ideologies. Now, you could have an ideology of religion in a community. You know, people who have the same religion. You could have gender specific. You know, and different ideologies, like political ideologies. What kind of economy do you have in a community? Do you have a capitalistic community or do you have a socialistic community? Usually your more socialistic communities, like your hoods, because that's where most of your welfare and your Section 8 is. But again, do those areas look good? Now, you can live in a hood, and if you take care of it, you'll be proud to come home. But when it comes to any community, people are individuals. So just because you're doing your job, the next person might not be doing their job. And you can have some good communities that can become bad too. It just depends on the type of people that are moving into your communities. You don't want people who are destructive coming into your communities because they're going to bring your property value down. Also, you want to make sure that when we talk about saving a community, here's the only way you're going to save some of these black communities. You're just going to have to, all the blighted homes, you're going to have to bulldoze them down and start from scratch. But we blacks, certainly we've had the experiences way back in the 20s with Black Wall Streets and Omaha, Nebraskas and Wilmington, North Carolinas, and I believe Raleigh, North Carolina is another place. Rosewood, Florida. Did I say Omaha, Nebraska? There's some of them. But if you're going to have a sense of community, you have to have a sense of pride in yourself. And a number of us really don't take pride in ourselves. And I'm going to tell you this. If you want to save the community, you got to be in the community. Now, it used to be with athletes. It's because it's kind of funny. You have a number of athletes, particularly black athletes, who talk about being oppressed. But I tell you what, they're not taking their money going back to any black community helping it out. And let me tell you one group, the Jacksons. The, the Jacksons are from Gary, Indiana. And I've actually seen the Jacksons' house. They actually do live at 2300 Jackson Street, which is in Gary, Indiana. I've seen it. But do you think they've ever gone back to Gary to visit? Their house is a museum now, but do you think they're ever going to take their money and put it into Gary? You think Denise Williams is going to come back? She's also from Gary, Indiana. No. But these are the people out there who are talking about saving a community. You can't save what doesn't want to be saved or what can't be saved. What you can do is you could probably get an individual or individuals out there to build individual homes in that community, but the community is not functioning. You may have some utilities, but you don't have banks. You have a poor education system, unless you go to homeschooling. And who's running your communities? See, this is when I get in my next segment, talk about politics, but the ideologies. Some of these communities, you don't have families. So you're going to have basically a single mother who's struggling. You got a number of boys out there killing each other, girls out there killing each other. Now, the same thing goes on in the trailer community too, because I've seen some of those communities. They're like your matter of fact. I'll show you blighted images of trailer communities. Yes, I want to keep it fair and balanced. Let's keep it fair. Let's keep it fair and balanced. Yes. Some blighted areas of trailer communities. Let's go. Let me share it. Now, some of these look good. Now that's look at over here. Now, what happened was this was an area of blighted trailer communities. What happened? Gentrification came. Once gentrification came, they turned this blighted area into this. So, again, you also look at places like this. These are all, and I got to be fair and balanced. This is blighted area. These are trailer homes. Right here. These are all blighted. But see, when it comes to people, they don't take care of their homes. Home's supposed to be where the heart is. And again, if you really have the government taking care of you, the government, all they're going to do is give you a small piece of cheese. Yeah, they'll give you a home, but since it's not your home, are you going to take care of it? No. I mean, a community is functioning inside and out, from your clean house to your clean streets. I've gone in some areas of Indianapolis, especially down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, right off of I-65. Some of the places there are horrible. Then you can go on the east side like the 30th Street. Go all the way up to 46th Street. Generally, everything in Indianapolis on the east side, maybe 46th Street down to 10th Street, is bad. But again, Indianapolis is an urban area. Cleveland, blighted areas of Cleveland. But again, when we have a community, a community focus. A real community should be planned. And what I hear people saying, I want to save the community. Saving the community is putting some economics in that community. That's what saving the community is. And that's what many of us don't do because we don't understand what community is. And you have a number of individuals who want to save a community that they don't live in. Now, I live in an apartment complex. It's a community. And there are rules within inside a community. And the rules are you're supposed to clean up after your dogs. We also have maintenance out here. Maintenance is supposed to take, it's fall, and you have a lot of leaves out here. You know, your community, you take pride in, you keep it clean. You don't have a bunch of people hanging out at the corner store smoking cigarettes, buying beer. That's not a good community. You know, a good community, you don't have everything that has bars in the windows. Or I know in Baltimore, when I used to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken on North Avenue, you used to put your money in a turnstile. And then you had bulletproof glass. They had that because safety for your workers. And generally, a good community, you have a good police force. Now, there are some police out here who are very ratchet themselves. But when we focus on community, we have to focus on how do we want the community to function? What interests do we have? Yeah, because a community is nothing more than people. That's what a community is. Now it could be people of Jewish faith. It could be black people. It could be Chinese people. Now you notice in some of those other communities, like called it Little China, they're functioning. I know for a few blocks in New York City, they have an Indian community. And they are functioning communities because all those Indian people, what do? They support their own. I mean, they have their own hotel. They got a school. I think they have like 10 blocks in New York. But there's in Baltimore, there's Little Italy. They have their own. Put their money together and they keep it clean. It's like on the east side when you go to Patterson Avenue in Baltimore, just as you leave downtown Baltimore from what used to be the power plant. But they have communities because they put their time and their money in the communities. Now, when it comes to black people, we have money, but we're busy spending our money on frivolous garbage. So we don't invest in building anything. This is why you always hear the jargon, we never build anything. Well, we did, but see, when it comes to black people, and this is where I will give them a little bit, black people have actually helped other minorities out. Now, of course, other minorities came over here with money, but black people have been treated the worst. They have. But even when black people were treated the worst, black people did build. I mean, they did have open heart surgery, the mailbox. They had communities. What happened? Some of your low-class whites took the communities out because they were jealous. And this is where I can understand why some blacks don't want to build communities up because they're afraid that they might be destroyed. You can't trust these governments out here. You can't trust them. But you can't trust people who look like us either because people who look like me are running some of these cities as well. and they're running him into the ground. Look at Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. Has some YouTubers who live in Chicago. They can tell you about it. It's not a good place to live. But again, when we deal with community, let's go back and rehash it. What is a community? Well, I'm going to go into the dictionary definition as I sum it up. Basically, overall, when we deal with community, the community is basically a group of people living in the same space or having a particular characteristic in common, a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. Again, like-minded people. As I read both of those paragraphs, that's what a community is. And when you don't have like-minded people, your community, it really doesn't work. How you doing, Celine? Welcome to the chat. But that's what community is. So if you're going to save the community, you have to really understand what community is. And then you have to have the finances. You have to know what you're going to save in the community. Because one thing I'm going to tell you, you're not going to be able to save everybody. Because everybody's not going to want to be saved. So before you focus on community, focus on yourself as an individual. Because if you can't save people from community A, take the like-minded people from community A along with yourself, go form another community. Separation is a good thing. But when it comes to community, it's basically a group of people with ideas in common. That's what a community is. Now I'm going to move on to my next subject to talk about ideologies. That's right. What are ideologies? And we're going to get into what ideologies are. And I'm going to present to you some examples of some ideologies. Now, when we deal with ideology, it's basically a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. Or we can say it's the science of ideas, the study of their origin and nature. So that's what an ideology is. Now, what are the different types of ideologies? I'm going to get into those right now. Different types of ideologies. All right. Well, when we get into ideologies, I'll share my screen again. Now, again, I'm on my Wikipedia screen. We talk about ideologies. Basically, we're talking about a political ideology. Again, it's a certain set of ethical ideas, principles, doctrines, myths, or symbols of a social movement, institution, class, or large group that explains how society should work and offers some political and cultural blueprint for a certain social order. So political ideology basically concerns itself with how to allocate power and what ends it should be used. Some political parties follow a certain ideology very closely, while others may take a broad inspiration from a group or related political ideology. or ideologies without specifically embracing any one of them, because any ideology's popularity is partly due to influence of moral entrepreneurs who sometimes act in their interest. And also, political ideologies have two dimensions: goals of how society should be organized, methods, the most appropriate way to achieve the goal. Again, so let's talk about ideology. It's a collection of ideas. Typically, each ideology contains certain ideas on what it considers to be the best form of government, like uh, auto democracy, autocracy, and the best economic system. Those are your ideologies. Now, again, many people don't understand what ideologies are. Basically, when we deal with ideologies, we deal with political ideologies. And again, I have the link up if you're interested in coming up. But let's look at the poll. Should we look at politics on a local level? 80% yes, 20% no. And for those who are in the chat, thank you for being in the chat. I my numbers are low right now, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to keep going on, giving you this information because it's very important that you understand it. So what I'm going to do right now is list some ideologies. Listing of political ideologies. All right. All right. So when we deal with ideologies here, as I share my screen here, most of the time we talk about political ideologies. Now, our political ideologies, and of course, there are also subtypes. So when we talk about governments here in the United States, we basically talk about liberal versus conservative. But there's other ideologies out there. One of the political ones is anarchism. Then you have the subtypes of political ideology, like individualist anarchism, libertarianism, social anarchism, insurrectionary anarchism, classical anarchism. Then you have authoritarianism, which comes under absolute monarchism. That's when you have a king. You have autocracy, despotism, dictatorship, imperialism. Now, for the rich people, oligarchy, police state, totalitarianism, plutocracy, theocracy. Now, basically, a theocracy deals with individuals who are basing their policies off of religion. Now, these are individuals that you would see over there in the Middle East, and for the most part, they're definitely far right. They're also equally as dangerous as the far left. And then you have communitarianism, which is you have communitarianism, corporatism, mutualism, distributism, Eurasianism, and then you have the big one, communism, barracks communism. That's what you have. We move on. I'm not going to get into the names, but what I will do, I'm going to drop the information right here in the chat. You can look it up yourself. But this is what I'm doing. All right, some more ideologies. Again, communism. Under communism, that's when we had Stalinism, Marxism. This looks like Naxalism, Leninism, by Lenin, by Stalin. Then you have conservatism, because you have, it looks like authoritarian conservatism, bioconservatism, black conservatism, neoconservatism. You have civic conservatism, classic conservatism. And of course, we get into corporatism, absolutist corporatism, communitarian corporatism, conservative corporatism, mutualist movement, national syndicationalism, neo-feudalism, and again, we have economic corporatism. And then we get into democracy. Democracy, and by the way, we live in the United States. We are not a democracy. We are a democratic republic. And these are some of the ones that you have probably heard. Getting into democracy, there's associative democracy, bioregional democracy. I call it bourgeois democracy, cellular democracy, majoritarianism. Then you got producism. Then you got sortionism. Then we get into, and these are left wing now, environmentalism. You have bright green, deep green, light green, and free market environmentalism. Then we get into what we call your fascism and Nazism, where you deal with your neo-Nazism, your neo-fascism, your eco-tascism, your crypto-fascism, and then you have your classical fascism. And then what we hear here in the United States, identity politics. So you have age-related rights movements, animal-related rights movements like PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, disability-related rights movements, and then the granddaddy of them all that we have here, as we get down, and there are a lot of them. Make sure I'm going to give them to you too. We have feminism. Now, for feminism, we have neo-feminism, radical feminism, first wave feminism. That's your Susan B. Anthony, your Sojourner Truths. Then we get into your Gloria Steinems and your Betty Friedan's. That's your second wave feminism. Then you got your third wave feminism. And right now you got your fourth wave feminism. And these ideas are bad. This is what basically we talk about on YouTube, the feminism. And that has broken away many families. The no-fault divorce. It's basically another left-wing ideology, because feminism and Marxism go hand in hand. Then we have liberalism. Now, liberalism is funny because most of us believe that liberalism is left-wing. But there's classic liberalism, and that meant absolute liberty. Then you have neoliberalism. Then you have secular liberalism, social liberalism. Then you have techno-liberalism and secularism. And then there's another one, I'm going to say ordo-liberalism. And then you get into your libertarianism. Now, when people talk about being a libertarian, they're basically, I consider them individuals who could be in the middle. They got some left-wing views and some right-wing views. But basically, when people are libertarians, they basically don't want government interfering with anything. Because basically they take ideas from the left and the right and put them together. And I call it more or less your libertarians. They're your more reasonable people, because you have, now anything radical, you don't want to deal with it. In fact, your colleges and universities, they're teaching a lot of radicalism. So basically, when we deal with libertarianism, there's classic or classical liberal radicalism, eco-socialism, you can tie that in with the environment, free market anarchism, then you got paleo libertarianism, and then you got proprietarianism, then you got nationalism. Nationalism, you've heard that term. Diaspora nationalism, cultural nationalism, civic nationalism, bourgeois nationalism. And then a term that came up when Donald Trump was president, and I'm going to get into some of the ideas. I'm going to get into some of the definitions of some of these ideologies in just a few minutes. What I'm doing, I'm giving you the ideologies and I'm giving you the sub-ideologies so you'll know what I'm talking about. Populism. So we have conservative populism, economic populism, liberal populism, reactionary populism, and social populism. And then the big one, we got progressivism. This is what your lefties are, your progressives. So we have economic progressivism, social progressivism, techno progressivism, transnational progressivism. And then there's socialism. And we have Nasserism, Ba'athism, revolutionary socialism, Marxist revisionism, reformist socialism, and democratic socialism. Those are the ideologies. Now, I'm going to go ahead and continue. I'm going to give you some definitions because there are a lot of definitions, and these are going to be brief. And if you want to know more about them, see how far it's going to go. It's about 17 of them, but these you should definitely know. So when we deal with anarchism, anarchism is a type of political philosophy and movement that is against all forms of authority and rejects involuntary and forceful notions of hierarchy. Anarchism calls for the abolition of the state, which it holds to be undesirable, unnecessary, and harmful. Historically, it is commonly associated with anti-capitalism and socialism. Then you have authoritarianism. Now, authoritarianism is a form of political ideology that rejects political pluralism. It employs strong central power to preserve its political status. Authoritarianism regimes may either be autocratic, they also may be oligarchic and military in nature. Military dictatorships are the most examples of authoritarianism. Then you have communitarism. Now, communitarism is an ideology which stresses on the connection between the individual and the community. The main belief is that an individual's identity and personality is shaped by relationships within the community, with a smaller degree of development being stressed upon individualism. Then you have communism. Now, communism is a social, philosophical, political, and economic ideology whose main objective is the formation of a society where there is common ownership and the means of production are owned by the common masses without the presence of social class, money, and state. No, the state is the center of everything. It's in between capitalism and socialism. And then you have conservatism. Is a cultural, social, and political philosophy that promotes and seeks to preserve traditional social institutions. The core principles of conservatism may vary from region to region, depending on the traditions and practices of the region, but they all oppose modernism and sees a return to traditional values. Then you have Corporatism. Corporatism is a political ideology which advocates the organization of society by corporate groups such as agriculture, labor, military, business, scientific, and gold associations on the basis of their common interests. Again, I'm dealing with political ideologies, and these ideologies are what you hear in the news. You're gonna be hearing it during election day, but these are words you need to know. Then you have democracy, refers to a form of government where people have the power to choose their governing legislatures or the authority to decide on a legislation. And then you have environmentalism. It's a broad ideology and social movement that is concerned with environmental protection and the improvement of the ecology so that both humans and animals can live peacefully in their respective environments. Then you have fascism and Nazism. It's a political ideology which espouses authoritarian ultra nationalism with characteristics of dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and rigidly of society and economic. Nazism, on the other hand, is a form of fascism with disdain for liberal democracy and parliamentary democracy. Then you have something else that we play, identity politics. Identity politics is a ideological is it's ideological as well as a political approach where people of a particular race, religion, gender, social background of any identifying factors develop political agendas that are based on issues which may affect their lives. Then again, feminism is a large social movement, to political movement and ideology that's aimed to define and establish the political, economic, personal, and social equality of the genders. Then you have liberalism. It's a political and moral philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed, and equality before the law. Then we go into libertarianism. Libertarianism is a political ideology with liberalism as a core of its foundation. It's a core principle of its core foundation. That's what libertarianism is. Then we get into nationalism. It's an idea and movement that holds that the nation should be congruent with the state. As a movement, nationalism tends to promote the interest of a particular nation, especially with the arm of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance over its homeland. And then you have populism. Populism is a political stance which stresses the idea of people, and people find basically it spins a narrative of people versus a group of elites. In other words, Donald Trump promoted that very well. Took the common folk versus the political elites. You can say that could be somewhat identity politics as well, because you're dealing with a group. Then you deal with progressivism. It's a philosophy in politics that supports social reforms and is based on the idea that progress and achievements in science, technology, and economic development are vital to the development of humanity as a whole. So, again, those are your political ideologies. Let's go back to the poll again. My poll, again, we still have 10 votes. Should we look at politics at the local level? 80% yes, 20% no. Again, there's a teaching moment here. And I went briefly over ideologies. And it's very important that you understand what you're facing when you deal with ideologies, because you're going to hear those words time and time again. And those ideologies are political, and for the most part, governments go by those ideologies. And you don't want extremists who are running your country. You don't want extremists who are running your cities. And that moves on, that moves me to the next topic, local politics. I know a number of us are going out there to vote. But many of us focus too much on who we're putting in the federal Congress and the Senate. What we need to look at is, okay, we're a country, but we also are a country made up of 50 states. Each state has its own constitution. It has its own laws. Like I said, I live in Indiana. The laws here in Indiana are different than the laws in California. Well, when you vote, the type of government you put in is going to be the type of government, especially their philosophies, the ideology of the government is what's going to make or break a state. Now, California and New York, they're extremely left wing to me. Usually, your most oppressive governments are your governments who don't like capitalism. Now, the problem I do see with capitalism, it's not trickle down, but it's not made to be trickle down either. Here with capitalism, it's made to have an employer and employees. And a capitalist is one who's out to make money. And you're going to use people to make money. You pay people for the time. Now, most people don't understand capitalism. You do have a lot of greedy people out here. However, it's the people who spend the money, who take the risk, they get the breaks. Now, when it comes to local politics, there's not as much money put into a candidate. And see, with local politicians, this is where you can really hold them accountable. In your local politics, they come via your state roads, your municipal systems. I mean, you have to have a good transit system. You talking about a community? Well, if your local government puts the money into a good mass transit system, that could also reduce carbon emissions. It could take some cars off the road. But you have your local politicians that we don't look at. And that's usually where a lot of your budget is. And when you go out and vote for your local politicians, you have to also look at what's going on with what's going on your ballot. Might be some referendums on that ballot. And on your local side, depending on where you live, you're voting for your sheriff, your county council, your city council, your mayors, your governors, you're voting on your state, and you're voting on your state senate. Most of us don't take the midterms as passionately, or we don't think of them as important as we do the presidential election. Now, you remember the president can only do certain things. Now, the president does have executive order privileges. However, the president can be impeached, where when you have your Congress and your senators, they can run as many times as they want, as long as they win. Presidents have term limits. Well, if you look in your cities, you look in your states, governors have term limits. Mayors have term limits. You notice all your executive people have term limits. Well, it is your legislatures. Your legislatures are the ones who are making the laws. Your judges, they're the ones who are interpreting the laws. If you want a fair criminal justice system, you have to vote for the right judges. And now, in order to understand the criminal justice system, you need to actually become a juror. When I was in Pennsylvania, I was a juror. I got a chance to see how the criminal justice system works because not all criminal justice systems are fair. And in order to change something, you have to get on the local level. And the reason why I believe the local level is important because you got your school boards on the local level. You want to see what your children are teaching, you vote on the school board. And when you vote on the school board, you're going to get an idea of the curriculum. Now, again, you have unions involved with all these school boards as well. But your local politics, that's where your budget is. That's when you can really hold your politicians accountable. This is when you can go have your, I call it your town hall meetings, because these individuals, they're not a salute, brother Free Zone. Your local politicians, they're the ones that are going to set parameters. They're the ones who are actually putting in the policies. They're the ones that are allocating funds. Yes, they get everything from your federal, but if you want to go into building new infrastructure, if you want money for businesses, it's on a local level. And a number of individuals don't understand local politics. We've been so conditioned with federal politics, but your local politics is more important because within that state, you got counties, you got cities or other municipalities, you still have government. And let me tell you something, if you're going to get into politics, it's best to get into politics on a local level. Why? Because you don't need as much money. You can actually get your start into politics from the local level. Also, your local level is going to tell you how much of a budget they need for city workers. Some people want smaller government. Now, again, it depends on the ideology because the same parties that we have at the federal level, we have them at the state and local level too, Republicans and Democrats. But we still have the same type of ideologies. Some are socialists and capitalists, the same ideas. The question is, what type of government do you want? Your local government, you should be out there voting for your sheriffs. You should be out there, your school board, your city, your county council, your county executives, your mayors, your deputy mayors. These are the people that are most important. A lot of us don't think that. But all your budgets, they're held by your local government. You also have your governors and lieutenant governors because you need to know what's going on within your state. And a number of us, we don't know what's going on in our states at all. Do we care? No, we really don't care. Some of us don't. And this is why I'm presenting this today. You know, while everybody talks about community, and this all ties to community, and I dropped the link for anybody who wants to come in. I would probably only be in here for another 10 minutes, about an hour and a half. If you really want change, the good thing about local politics is you can get out a number of incumbents. They're easier. You don't need as much money. In fact, your word is going to be much worth it at the local level because Some of these politicians, depending on where you work, they're not full-time politicians. They're part-time. So some of them have jobs like you and me. And if they don't do what they're supposed to do, we can get them out much easier because we don't have to worry about districts being gerrymandered like your regular senators and your congresspeople. And the reason why they gerrymander the districts, so they want to keep the incumbent in there. And that's why on a federal level, nothing's ever going to change. Yeah, you'll get a few politicians who pass away, and you'll get some who retire. You may even get some that you will beat in an election. But in the end, you still got a lot of those cronies who've been in there for a long time. They made a career out of politics. They made a lot of money out of politics. Back in 1992, they gave themselves a raise. They amended the Constitution. And the people who have a lot of power are your legislatures. Your legislatures, even in your state, your county council, the ones who make the laws hold the purse strings. Now, do I think all government programs are bad? No. If you're a minority business, you can get government contracts. Whether on a state and local level. But see, you have to know what program to get. And where you can have an effect on local elections, if you're a business, or even if you're a citizen, you need to get to know who your local people are, and you need to address them. And one way to address them is have them on panels, like what I'm doing right now, local radio stations, because they're going to be held more accountable, because they're more scrutinized, because they're here. You see, our congressmen and senators on the federal level, they're in Washington. Sometimes they come back here. But for the most part, they don't even want to deal with us. When it comes to your local level, they have to deal with us. And your DAs you vote for. That's part of your criminal justice system. That's why local politics is important. You have to get an idea of how individuals vote on a local level. Get a voting record. Many of us don't even know who our local people are. Now, I know I've done it myself. I would get something from a politician who's running locally, wouldn't care about it, and I throw it in the trash. Now I look at it and I say, okay, what is this person's voting record? Is he a socialist? Because I can cut right through the BS. Know if you're a socialist, know if you're for the people, because I read it. And then ask the questions. Because, see, your local politicians are going to be more present. And that's the difference. That's why I say local elections are more important than your federal elections. But most of the people, again, don't know that. And this is why colleges like the school I attend to, Purdue, in order to graduate now, you have to pass a civics exam. Now, it's a good thing they brought that back. Colleges need to bring that back. I mean, I've seen a number of students out here who don't even know the three branches of government. That's poor. Some of them didn't even know who the president and vice president were. So if they don't know who the individuals on the federal level are, you think they're going to know who's on a local level? No, because they don't pay attention. And local politics is, you got to pay attention, because that's the referendums that are on that ballot. You got to understand what that ballot is talking about. This is why I said, if you read everything, that ballot, it's going to ask you, are you for or against? You got to know what they're talking about. Because I know there's a lot of jargon, especially when it comes to putting different House sections, Senate, or different ballot measures. Some of us don't even know what they're talking about, but you can get an idea of what they're talking about. And this is why community is very important too, because see, it's your community that's going to help elect individuals who are about your community. That's why you should put people from your community in power so you can get resources to help take care of your community. But see, a number of us don't think like that. But I guarantee in some of these well known communities, these upscale communities, you better believe they're dealing with their local politicians. Let me give you an example. Individuals who are doing construction, I will tell you this, a number of them, the reason why they get a lot of the jobs here in Indiana, Reith Riley and E&B Paving. I know when I was in Pennsylvania, J.D. Eckman was getting a lot of the jobs. I know they write the politician a check. The politician's going to give them that contract. Again, politics is a dirty game, but your local politics, that's where your money is coming from. Yes, it comes down from the feds, but locally, your local politicians are going to dictate how you live. It's their policies. You know, people think, oh, federal government. Because even local is even more important than your state. Now, of course, the state, your state capital, where everything is centralized, they're going to allocate the funds to all your communities. And sometimes, depending on your ideology, your governor, he knows how some of the mayors voted. And depending on which party is in power, if it's a Republican governor, he might give all of his Republican county executives and, of course, city mayors most of the money, while the Democratic mayors get nothing, and vice versa. Do not think that local politicians don't go by party lines, because they do. And you have to be able to understand what's going on in the political process. Many of us don't. Many of us don't care about what's going on. But yes, let me check the poll question out again about local politics. Well, now I've gotten 11 votes so far. Should we practice politics on a local level? 82% yes, 18% no. Again, 82% yes, no to 18%. This is why I say politics is local. And a way to get out there is you got to participate on a grassroots level. You ask questions. Many of us don't do that. If we want change on a local level, got to participate. Because it's easy to ask the local politicians. Now, I'm not going to say that they are truthful. Generally, a lot of politicians lie so they can get themselves elected. They tell you what you want to hear, but with the local politicians, it's much easier to hem them up. Why? Because their job can be taken away really quickly. And again, like I said before, most of them are not full time. And see, now, if you're a city worker or a municipal worker, you're going to be voting for the politicians that are going to help you keep your job, because when administrations change, you may lose your job. And I'm going to tell you why. You see, when it comes to local politics, municipal workers, not like state workers, some of you might not even work for the city for 20 years. Some of you may work for the city. If you have a union like AFSCME, that'll help you out. But if you're a right to work state like Indiana is, it's not gonna help you out. And see, when it comes to local politics, administrations change a lot more than they do on a federal level, even on a state level. And remember something too, you have a lot more municipalities out here than you have politicians on a state level and even on a federal level. That's why voting in your local elections is very important, because when it comes to the criminal justice system, states have counties, and each county might have a different way they operate with their criminal justice system. Many of us don't know that, because I live in a red state. Now, where I live in Tippecanoe County, it's red. But if I go down to Marion County, which is all Indianapolis, that's blue. They operate totally differently down there. Now, of course, Indianapolis is the capital. Every state has a capital, and most of the capitals are centralized within the state. And that's another thing that individuals need to know. You need to know what the capital of your state is. You need to know what's going on at your capital. Because again, when it comes to government, remember, government is not just at the federal level, it's at the state and local level. And the more you understand the local level, the better you're going to be. But most people don't understand the government. And again, if you have a community that's invested in their local government and they hold their government officials accountable, it's going to be better for the community. But if you have a community that doesn't, your local government is going to use and abuse you, and your local government is going to keep you oppressed. So people don't understand. It's not always about party. And also, you have to look at the ideology of the people you're putting in power locally. Your school boards. Your school boards deal with identity politics based on gender, based on race. They do. So if you put the right people in power, it's going to be better for you. Most of us don't do that. We don't do that at all. But again, politics is local. It operates the same way, parliamentary style. But again, many of us don't understand how politics works. We're thinking locally, like next week. Certainly, this is a midterm election next week. But also, you're going to have some local people. And if it's an off year for local people, the next year, vote. Most of us, and another thing about voting, we always say our vote doesn't count. It may seem like it doesn't count. The more active we are, the more our vote can count. And this is why voting in a local election, you can also get your name out there. Because guess what? If your local politicians aren't doing their job, you can run for office. As long as you don't have a criminal record, you can run for office. Are you going to need some money? Are you going to need some marketing? Sure, but you're not going to need as much as somebody who's running on your federal level, because you got a lot CPACs, everybody funneling money into your federal people, your federal politicians, your local, not as much money. So you have to understand the platform that you're running as well. A lot of us don't understand the platform. And this is where we get ourselves hemmed up. Again, politics is local. And see, you vote the right politicians in there, you might get some of these fees to go away, like inspection fees. You're not going to get a reduction in parking tickets or parking mean. You're not going to get that. I mean, your law enforcement, you might even get an increase in law enforcement. Forget to defund the police. That's all at a local level, not at a federal level. So again, look at your school boards. Look at your criminal justice system. Look at your city workers or your county workers. Look at your streets. Look at your neighborhood. Also, you have the right government. You may even have people to come pick up your trash. I know the city of Frankfort, Indiana, they have their own trash cans. They got brand new trash cans. And see, if you have the right community, and you pick the right people can, you can always go in there to see if they're assessing your taxes properly. Because remember something, besides paying federal tax, you pay local and state tax as well. So if you don't have good roads, that's something you need to talk about when you deal with local government. I mean, and the local government, they're going to give equipment so they can keep your streets clean during the winter time. Your public works department. Again, your sheriffs. Now, again, politics is not perfect on the federal, the state, or the local level. However, when you have local politicians, they're the ones that are going to help your community out. Now, when you look in your urban areas, if you have a good mayor, they can allocate money for a bigger police force, more fire stations. Unfortunately, if you look at Chicago, well, that mayor wanted to defund the police. And you look at what's going on in that city. Most of the cities run by Democrats. They're running to the ground. But again, you have a number of people in cities who aren't very politically savvy. They'll go along to get along. And that's why in the city you have some good areas and you have some bad areas. Because even in the city, well, I know in Chicago they call them aldermen up there. The people that live in Hyde Park, they're living a hell of a lot better than they are in Inglewood, Chicago. And when I lived in Portage, individuals who were living in Portage were living much better than they were living in Gary. The bottom line is, it's how the funds were allocated. In fact, the higher you go, well, even on the state level, local level, there's always a chance that money is going to be wasted. But see, when you deal with the federal, it's very hard to really catch that money that's being wasted. But on the local level, it's very different. Why? Because the budgets are smaller. That's what you have to understand. So, again, when you talk about community and local politics, you have to tie ideology into that as well. Where's the money going? Who's it being spent on? And see, on your local level, you get the school board. Again, how do your schools look? That's what people aren't talking about. Let's go back to the poll again. See if we got any more votes. I got 13 votes. Should we look at politics on the local level? 85% yes, 15% no. Let's continue to get the likes up. I'm going to be on for another 7 minutes. Keep it at 2 hours. That way I get all of my topics in. Looks like I'm not going to have a panel tonight because I don't have anybody in here, but wanted to get all my topics in. So again, election day. Let's look at your ballot closely. See who is on the ballot locally. Know who they are. And see, one of the reasons why individuals don't understand the local politics is they don't teach it to them anymore in school. Civics is the answer. When they took civics out, dumbed a lot of students down. But local politics is important. Most of us might not think it is, but it is. Local politics is where you can actually make changes. Because, again, there are some counties and states that you don't want to live in. Some counties have higher taxes than others. Of course, some counties have more people than others, too. Like if go down to Whitestown, Indiana, which is it's in Boone County, getting close to Marion County. You don't think their government is allocating any resources for them? I mean, you look at those homes down there and see, when you live in a decent community, especially you live in an area where the tax bracket, where they have a lot of taxpayers, that's good. That could also be good for your community as well. Why? Because your facilities are going to be a lot better. It's going to be more for your children to do. Now, if you live in a small country element, it can also be good for you. Now, when it comes to ideology, the people in the suburban area, they tend to be a little bit more on the liberal side, the progressive side. But now, if you move away and you go to the farm area or the smaller towns like Fowler or Sheridan, I'm talking about some places here in Indiana or Wheatland, they're going to be a lot more conservative. Shout out to Brother Deshaun. Welcome to the chat. But that's what you have to do. You have to understand what your local government is doing. Again, voting isn't the only thing you should do. You need to get involved. Voting records. I'll start about that, Brother Deshaun. Yeah, when I go live, check my community tab. And one of the reasons probably why you didn't get the notification, Brother Nate, he was also live. Shout out to Brother Isaiah. Shout out. But again, here in America, many of us need to bolster up on what's going on locally around our cities and towns. Because when we don't, this is when the rug gets pulled from under us. Now, again, when it comes to politics, I'm not an expert. But I know how I want to live, and I don't want to struggle. And policies can make a difference. When you live in an area that has high rent, high taxes, it's going to be very tough to live if you're an average working person. That's why you want an ideology that is not so totalitarian, or I call it the distribution, more or less redistributing wealth. It's more like socialism. You don't want that kind of government running locally. because it's basically going to put people in a state of oppression. Can't tax the hell out of people and expect them to be able to pay their bills, because there's some areas that you're not going to get $20 an hour for a job. Those are few and far between. And everybody's not going to own a business, especially in the smaller towns. Now, going back to what I said, when it comes to some of the suburbs, the tax base is larger. But you better believe, even if they're Democrats, they're keeping an eye on their local politicians. They know the mayor. They're going to make sure that mayor is not in that office. They're going to check out their police stations, their fire stations. They're going to make sure that they live pretty well. Why? Because it's their money. And they're paying a lot of dollars to live, and taxes are high. Now, don't think the same thing is not going to go on in the areas that don't have a large tax base. Oh, it's going to go on as well. Because, see, the ideologies are going to be different. See, on the left, even on the local level, they cater everything to the alphabet community. But now when you go away from the liberal parts or the liberal counties or the liberal cities out to where it's a little bit more conservative, traditional values rule. So when it comes to ideology and community, you have to find out what's going to be best for you. And many of us, we don't know. Or we do know. This is why some of us move to red states from blue states. The problem, moving from a blue state to a red state, don't bring that ideology with you. Keep that there. Why do I say that? Peace, my brother. Welcome to the 401 Talk Zone radio show. I dropped the link at 2 hours. Anybody that wants to come on, I'll drop the link again. Peace, Brother X. Get on over there to Brother X and subscribe to his channel. He's got some awesome stuff on his channel as well. I'm at the 2 hour mark. I just dropped the link. Anybody who wants to come up, they're welcome to come up. If you missed my topics earlier, I talked about community. I talked about ideologies. Community and ideologies, and of course, local politics. Very important because they do equal community. If you don't have the right people in power, and that should be somebody from your own community. Even, let me tell you something, if you live in a house and you have a homeowners association, you need the right people there too. Because you have some people who, they don't have a lot of brains. They have shit for brains. And they're going to try to use their power and abuse their power. You don't want totalitarianism in your community. It's never going to work. So again, you want a good community that has a lot of function. All right, Brother X, I'll be up here next Wednesday. Hey, try to catch your show as well. Now, going back to community. Communities should be functioning. Should have plenty of work, good education, should have decent people, places of worship. That's what communities should have. Should have good security with good police stations, of course, good firehouses, and good transportation. Have some of them that do, and some of them that don't. Now that goes into urban planning. But the bottom line, even with urban planning, it's when you get the local politicians involved. Because if you have a project that's good, you're going to get money from your local government to allocate that project because you want people to come to your town. You really want people, if you're on a local level, you want people to come. You want people to come to your community so they'll spend money. Isaiah says, do you think it's ignorant not to vote? No, I don't think it's ignorant not to vote, but I'm going to tell you this. When you vote, understand what you're voting for. Now, if you don't like either of the candidates, I will say this, write your name in there. You have a right to vote. I would suggest you use it. Now, I know voting is not the only answer, but when you vote, you do have some power on who you're putting in office. Now, of course, it comes down to ideology because you're only one vote, but your one vote matters. No, but if you don't feel any inclination to vote because you don't like anybody, don't vote. But I will tell you this, you can't make any changes if you don't participate in the process. So I don't think it's ignorant not to vote. That's something individual. I believe voting is important because I have a right to do it. Some people don't have a right to do it because they're in jail. But again, know what you're voting for when you do vote, though. Some people don't. Know that if you want a strong community, it's not about putting all that rah-rah shit out there going here with the signs and everything. Can you bring money? Can you make your community functionable? See, too many of us blacks talk about community, but we're not doing anything about community because many of us don't live in the community. I mean, it's easy to get back here on a microphone, on a panel, and be pro-black about community, but how are you going to contribute to the community? Do you have anything financial? Do you have a business idea? No. You're breathing hot air. It's not going to change the community. Even if you had the money, you're not going to change the community. You have to change people's mindsets. And when you can't change people's mindsets, then peace, my brother. Can't change people's mindsets. No matter how much money you put in the community, your community is still going to be oppressed. And it's hard to change people's mindsets who've been sitting in the dark for a long time. But again, there's community, there's ideology, and there's local politics. You have to figure out if you're looking to save the community, how are you going to do it? Do you have a plan? What issues are out there? Are you well financed? Are you well organized? What kind of leadership are you looking to have in a community? Those are the questions people don't ask. Because you have a lot of dysfunction in communities, especially the black community. And it's never going to be fixed when you have a matriarchal or feminist ideology in those communities. Never going to be fixed. So you have one or two choices. You can go in there and try to spend money to fix it, or you just don't move there. I would not move there if I'm not going to be respected. And I'm just going to say this too. You can't fix what's already broken. And it's not the community physically, it's the mindset of the people. So again, if you want community to be fixed, to be a part is just not talking about it. run for office on a local level. Don't come in with a totalitarianist type of ideology, and look at the community as a whole. Identify the problems. And if you have a lot of problems, not going to be able to fix problems overnight. Tackle the toughest problem. And then let people get behind you. And to fix the community, you're going to have to be in that community, not be 100 miles away talking about why I need to solve the community. You need to identify what the community is. And that's what's not happening. Identify what the community is. Let's get back to the poll question. Again, I have 15 votes. Should we look at politics on the local level? Yes. 80% yes. 20% no. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm at the 209 mark. Didn't have a panel. I talked about community tonight. I talked about ideology. And I also talked about local politics. All three of those topics are very important if you want to have a community that's functioning. But you have to know how to do it. Can't take it for granted. But when it comes to community, ideology, and local politics, they all run hand in hand. But the choice is yours whether you want to live in oppression or do you want to have capital. What type of community do you want? What is a community? What kind of leadership do you want in that community? And what is your ideology? Those are some of the questions you ask. And if you have the funding, you're well organized, and you have issues, you can begin fixing a broken community. But if you don't, and you're constantly talking, the community will never be fixed. Now, when we talk about community, specifically, we're talking about the Black community. I'm just going to put it out there like that. The Black community will never be fixed unless you fix the mindsets of people. Because many of us who are Black are still on a plantation. But in the end, the choice is yours. Community. It's about the people. The ideology and the local politics. You put those together, then you can go to work. But in the end, everybody is talking. Do you think business and creating jobs will fix the Black community? Partially. Most of the people in the Black community, though, they're brain dead. You got to get rid of the crime, and you have to create an environment for people to have businesses in the Black community. And right now, it's not going to happen. And you have to have families. And you have people. You need people that are going to maintain the community. And right now, that's not going to happen. But again, how you work in your community and how you make changes, that's up to the individuals. Because in the end, the question is, what type of community do you want? Do you want a community that is oppressed, crime ridden, or do you want a community that's functions that functions very well and safe? Again, the choice is yours. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for content on science, technology, engineering, and math, check out my STEM channel, the QCIS channel. On that channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and of course, math. Now, if you can't find the 401 Talk Zone radio show on YouTube or the QCIS channel on YouTube, you can always check me out on Twitter. Now, for the QCIS channel, I take it one step further. You can also find that channel on Twitter. And at the end of the day, and yes, I'm using that, I'm going to tell you this: be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Always know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And of course, if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. Now, I didn't have a panel tonight, and I'm going to decide next week whether to do another live or just do pre-recorded content. I will let you know in my community tab next week. But once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 401 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.